Fake shit broke. Don't have enough money on Xbox. Buy life Xbox for real people. Go Minecraft build battle. I'm gonna destroy you. Unboxed Xbox for 5 minutes in shop without paying for it. PS5 I had to wait 3 weeks in McDonald's. I can't afford any burger. Shit. Performance test. Thank you for your time waste.
The console wars have been going on for decades now, and they've just gotten more stupid over time. And I'm not just saying that. I opened a poll thingy on YouTube, and the majority of you agree that the console wars are not in fact smart and based. They are actually stupid and garbage. Currently, you have the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. Right now, as we speak, people are committing the cardinal sin of depicting Xbox fans as the soy jack and PlayStation fans as the Chad. This is some serious shit. People who spend an even larger percentage of their lives on the internet than I do are cranking out these hilariously dumbass takes on which plastic box is superior to the other one. Watching this nonsense go down actually gets me kinda nostalgic. I remember when I was still in the 5th grade, getting into stupid yelling matches with other kids for talking shit about Mario. And, I mean, I do still have strong opinions on video games these days, but at least I'm trying to understand where other people are coming from. I know Witcher 3 has an extremely beautiful world. I know that The Last of Us 2 has heartbreaking moments and great acting. I know why people like these games. It's just a matter of taste, and mine isn't better than yours, it's just different. In quality. But the problem with the console wars is how weirdly personal it is. For buying a plastic rectangle, you have apparently taken a side and people will hate you for it. It's the weirdest shit. In my opinion, arguing about video games themselves is more understandable because there are a ton of factors to consider concerning whether or not they're fun to play, and some of them are made by artists and are deeply personal and expressive. But as a sum of parts, a game console is a machine. It's a computer that happens to play video games. There are certainly some objective measures such as power and storage space and price, but at the end of the day, you buy a console for the express purpose of playing a video game. Now, even though I'm not really a fan of console wars per se, that doesn't mean I don't have any opinions. I think in my case, the games are the only thing that really matters. I was a Nintendo fanboy for years, but Metal Gear Solid 4 made me buy a PS3, and that was the end of that. Concerning the current generation, neither Sony nor Microsoft is really grabbing my attention. I mean, Microsoft can flex that extra 1.2 teraflops all they want, but it doesn't mean shit to me if they're just gonna squander it on racing sims. I mean, I'm sorry, I've been playing video games for 23 years. I can't get excited about driving a fictional car anymore. Now, beating the shit out of a carrot, on the other hand, that's something that I care about. If Microsoft could give me 12 teraflops Banjo-Kazooie, that's an insta-buy. But I also understand that that's very subjective. A lot of people love 12 teraflop Halo and Forza, and there's nothing at all wrong with that. I'm happy to shit on a company all day, but to shit on an individual because they happen to enjoy some products, well, that just makes you one of these guys. And I say that fully aware that I've almost definitely done that on a few occasions in my life, but that's part of growing up, right? Just realizing that you're trash and trying to fix it. But let's have some fun now, alright? We're gonna have a little retrospective on the console wars. That's what this is. I'm gonna give you a SparkNotes history lesson along with some of my own thoughts. So, long story short, we're gonna have a good time here. To start, we must go back to the original console war. It's Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. If you want to get technical, yeah, there were kinda console wars before then, like Sega had the Master System, and before that, there was the ColecoVision and Intellivision and the other Atari consoles, and if you really want to go back, you got all the different machines that all just play Pong. But if any sort of competition in that era of consoles could be considered a war, Nintendo versus Sega was like the Great War. Even if it wasn't technically the first console war, it honestly might as well have been. This would lay the foundation for console wars to come. You had two competitors with largely similar hardware. They shared a lot of multi-plat games, but they also had their own exclusives. The hardware was relatively similar, but with their own advantages and disadvantages. But back then, a lot of this console war stuff was the direct result of Sega's marketing campaign, which took a uniquely offensive and combative approach, which naturally rubbed off on their primarily younger, impressionable audience.
What Nintendo?
Sega's commercials were the official declaration of war, and the truth is, they had a very legitimate chance of winning at this point. By the way, let me just say, I'm so glad I wasn't actually around back then. Just imagining a bunch of kids running around screaming, Sega, 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 Sega! Just fucking annoying, right? While Nintendo was out here with this dorky businessman and these Mario groupies or whatever talking about the Super Nintendo looking like some kind of, mattress commercial, Sega was out here with Michael Jackson going like, I got a Sega Genesis, cause Nintendo is a piece of shit. And they were shitting on Mario Kart and going, look how fast the blast processing is, brother. And they got a black guy in there because Sega knew that every white kid just wants to be black, whether they admit it or not. And that's how you do it. You gotta know your audience. That's where the big buzzwords come in. Blast processing and bits. Blast processing was some magical power unique to the Genesis, which was widely understood as meaning it was faster. If you compare the specs of the Genesis versus the Super Nintendo, the Genesis falls short in many respects except for processing speed, which was a blazing 7.6 MHz processor. That's almost as fast as your wristwatch. Even though you had a lot of Super Nintendo games that looked significantly better than a lot of the stuff you would see on the Genesis, blast processing would stick for years to come. Even today people are talking about it, although nobody knew exactly what it meant, until like 2 years ago when Digital Foundry made a video on it. But then there was bits. The big thing about the Genesis was that it was 16-bit while the NES was only 8-bit, so Nintendo had to answer that with the 16-bit Super Nintendo. Everything became about bits. How many bits does the console have? I gotta know. But the funny thing about bits, much like blast processing, is that a lot of people just didn't know what the fuck they were, only that they meant the graphics were better, except when it didn't, and you had Doom on the 64-bit Jaguar looking worse than the 32-bit PlayStation. Bits would become the primary ammunition for the console wars. It didn't matter what they actually represented, bits were just really important, and the more you had, the better the console was. It even got to the point that when Sega started losing ground, they released a 32-bit add-on for the Genesis called the 32X, which had a very bad port of Doom on it, and some Star Wars crap. But again, for me, it all comes down to the games. While that's really a matter of opinion, SNES has Earthbound, Super Metroid, and Donkey Kong City. These are all phenomenal games, but the Genesis has Sonic 3. This is my favorite Sonic game. It looks amazing, the music is orgasmically good. I definitely think that Sonic still dominates the second dimension, and to be honest, I probably had more fun playing Sonic 2 than Super Mario World, but Super Nintendo has all those other games, so I'd probably give the edge to that. But the important thing is that with this competition, both sides were putting out better and better shit to outdo each other, and in the end, the winner, I guess, was us. The closest thing I can think of to a contemporary counterpart to those bit wars would have to be teraflops. Before PS4 and Xbox One came out, never in my life had I heard about megaflops, gigaflops, or teraflops in the context of video game marketing. Now it's all anyone ever talks about. Oh, PS4 is 1.84 teraflops, Xbox One is 1.31 teraflops, PS4 Pro 4.2 teraflops, Xbox One X 6 teraflops, PS5 10.8 teraflops, Xbox Series X 12 teraflops, Nintendo Switch 0.393 teraflops. What the fuck is a teraflop? Everybody and their grandma is talking about teraflops now, but if you ask them what a teraflop actually represents, most of them probably cannot tell you, other than it meaning the console is more powerful, which, again, isn't exactly wrong, I suppose. Well, combining my 1 year of ComSci with like 3 seconds of Google, I'ma see if I can sort this out. In the world of computees, FLOPS is an acronym that stands for Floating Point Operations Per Second, and teraflops indicates 1 trillion floating point operations per second. But what is a floating point operation? Well, it can refer to any mathematical operation or assignment done by a computer onto a floating point. But what the hell is a floating point? Well, in the world of computers, that refers to any sort of decimal number as opposed to an integer or something else. So any computer whose computational grunt can be measured in teraflops is a computer that can perform trillions of mathematical operations on a floating point number in a second. And in the context of a video game, everything you see is, at its most base level, a grotesquely massive array of sophisticated mathematical operations all working in tandem with each other. Sine waves, trigonometry, statistics, averages, dimensions, binary space partitioning, it's all math and it's all invisible, like fucking magic. But the problem is marketing. Condensing all of that cool shit into a short, sweet, repeatable message is very difficult, and even the definition I gave is the SparkNotes version, so instead they say, oh, we got a 12 teraflop, oh wait, no, we got a 15 teraflop, oh, we got a 28 teraflop, it's a beast, is a monster, just like this blast processing I keep under my pillow. It's all about marketing. Make your product sound incredible and do it in a succinct and distinct way that everyone will remember. Details, they don't matter, just throw them in the garbage. All of this is to say that these complex topics are all boiled down and simplified and behave as ammunition for the fanboys to use against each other in their debates over their favorite game consoles, even if they don't really know what they're talking about, like, at all. The funniest thing is, back when PS4 Pro and Xbox One X were announced, I remember fucking Mark Cerny, Sony man, saying that the PS4 Pro was actually more powerful than the Xbox One X because somehow 4.2 teraflops was actually 8.4 teraflops because they had some kind of like wizard magic that let them do some kind of like half float teraflop data operation shit. I don't know, but the important thing is that none of that turned out to be true, like, at all, so it was pretty funny. N64 versus PS1 versus Sega Saturn, the next round. Sony was pissed off at Nintendo for canceling the deal they had for the Super Nintendo CD, so as an act of revenge, they jumped into the console wars and devoured the entire industry. Sales-wise, this was the first time Nintendo lost. They came in a very distant second place to the PS1, while Sega finished dead last. The two big things this generation were real-time 3D graphics and CDs, except Nintendo decided to be a dumbass and stick with cartridges. While cartridges had advantages of their own, Nintendo remarkably failed to see that CDs were here to stay. They were much cheaper to produce, and the amount of data they could hold was astronomically larger than cartridges. The trade-off was big-ass loading times, except that didn't seem to bother anybody because the PlayStation sold 100 million units, which made it the best-selling game console of all time until the PS2 came out. The Saturn, by comparison, only sold like 9 million, which could be chalked up to complicated hardware design that was trickier to program for, and some say a lack of compelling exclusives. The N64 was similarly affected, not only by less conventional console architecture, but also the limitations of cartridges, but it was carried by Nintendo's own phenomenal lineup of first-party software, not to mention they had Rareware propping them up as well. I hear people say the N64 only has like 2 good games, but I can name more than 30 off the top of my head, so I don't know what kind of crack these people are smoking, but they aren't sharing and it's making me feel left out. It certainly is true that the PlayStation had far more games on it because its more approachable architecture and CD format made it way easier to make games for. Even though the N64 was more technically impressive in many respects, it had some weird technical kinks that often bottlenecked its capabilities. But for me, while the PS1 probably had more good games, I feel like the N64 had better good games. I ask what games define the PlayStation, and they might say Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy VII. Those are phenomenal games, but after that I hear Crash Bandicoot, which I always thought was kinda mid, and then Croc, and then Spyro. Well, Spyro's actually pretty good. But then there's a bunch of racing shit that I don't care about. And then what was going on in the N64? You had Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Star Fox 64, and GoldenEye. These 4 games alone are defining titles of their genre, kinda like MGS1 and Final Fantasy VII are defining games of theirs. Again, competition forced both platforms to put out some really nice shit, so really the consumers won this round again. Although I'd probably lean towards Nintendo, Metal Gear Solid is one of my favorite pieces of fiction ever made, so that would be an immensely huge sacrifice. But I could probably say the same about Majora's Mask, so again, it's all about the games. What I will say is if you're an RPG fan, PlayStation is pretty much objectively the better choice. N64 had like 2 RPGs and only one of them was Paper Mario, while PlayStation had like a billion of them, so PS1 is the RPG machine. But what about Sega? Well, one thing that is often cited as a contributing factor in the Saturn's downfall was the lack of a big 3D Sonic game. N64 had Mario 64 and PS1 had Crash. Both of these games could be considered crowning jewels that define their respective platform, whereas the only 2 Saturn games I can even think of off the top of my head are Panzer Dragoon and Sonic R. And I guess a really bad port of Quake 1, but I don't know. I'm very sure there are other great games, but they didn't seem to do the trick, so Sega jumped the gun on the next gen a little early with the Dreamcast. Now, the Dreamcast was a pretty solid machine, but they failed to recapture their Genesis success, which is a shame because it had its share of great games as well. This time they were smart enough to release a big 3D Sonic game with it. I know I've shit on Sonic Adventure before, but even that game's kinda grown on me like a little bit, but for better or worse, the discontinuation of the Dreamcast was Sega's official surrender from console wars for all time. Now they're a third-party developer, so I guess that means they signed some kind of non-aggression pact or something or other. Anyway, now you got Genesis games coming to the Switch, so if there's any doubt about who officially won, I think it should be pretty cleared up by now. The next round is the Cube versus the 2 Station versus the Box. Now Microsoft wanted a piece of this ever-expanding pizza pie. By the time Gamecube and Xbox came out, PS2 had already established a monumental lead. If Nintendo was a synonym for video games before, PlayStation pretty much became the new synonym. This also demonstrated that in the eyes of the consumer, a console's power doesn't necessarily matter in the long run so much as the games. The PS2 was significantly less powerful than the Cube and the Box, like Sonic Heroes on PS2 is barely playable, while the other versions were basically flawless at 60 FPS. Resident Evil 2 on GameCube looks way better than the PS2 version. This wasn't always the case, but it didn't matter either way because the PS2 had GTA, MGS2, and MGS3, and Shadow of the Colossus, and Final Fantasy whatevers, and all kinds of shit. Then Xbox launched with Halo, which is one of the most groundbreaking video games in history. And what did the GameCube launch with? Luigi's Mansion and Pikmin. Now, I love both of these games a lot, but I guess it's hard to blow people away with cute little Pikmin when the other guy has fucking Halo. But the point of this is that all 3 consoles had phenomenal games, and yet again, in a war, I would be forced to choose between Thousand Year Door and Metal Gear Solid 2. This is why war is bad and stupid. But this was the first time Nintendo actually showed up in last place in terms of sales. Not by a massive margin, but it was still decisive. Even though they wisened up and use discs now, they were using this weirdo format, which meant they couldn't even watch DVDs. Not that that should really matter in my opinion, but I guess it did. It's kinda sad because I feel like this was Nintendo at their most creative and experimental. I don't think we'll ever see them make something like Thousand Year Door again, and even Luigi's Mansion isn't quite what it used to be. And on top of that, we got 2 Pikmin games this generation, while Pikmin 4 has been close to completion for 6 years. In my opinion, this was Nintendo at their best. They struck a balance between creativity and giving people what they wanted that was so delicate and precise that I doubt it will ever happen again. But what really made this generation so cool was the optimism. Even though there were full-range 3D games and FPS games in the previous gen, this is when they were finally getting to a state that they were playable and fully functional. Consoles could now run these games at adequate frame rates and resolutions, and that opened a goldmine of previously untapped potential. There was also just a really high concentration of phenomenal games this generation. Like there were 3 entire GTA games. That is insane. Compare this to today, where we're stretching the same GTA way out over the course of 8+ years. Also, I gotta say, the PS2 having full backwards compatibility with the PS1 library is pretty sweet. Next up, we have the big one. PS3 versus Xbox 360 versus Wii. This is the first one that I seriously fought in before becoming the conscientious objector that I am today. The three things that defined this war were HD resolutions, motion controls, and online social networking capabilities. Nintendo's strategy of competing directly with these super powerful edgy consoles didn't exactly work last time, so this time they decided to gamble, and spoiler alert, they won. Nintendo chose not to go for super powerful hardware anymore, instead relying on this new motion control gimmick. The trade-off was that their games barely looked better than Gamecube titles, and they couldn't even do this fancy HD stuff that the other consoles had, and they received a lot of criticism for that. So did having shitty hardware that made Black Ops look like an N64 game stop the Wii from succeeding? Nope, it didn't even slow them down. The Wii just steamrolled the competition from the standpoint of sales. Everybody and their grandma was talking about it constantly, and it got a massive outpouring of third-party support, by which I mean it became the dumping ground for all kinds of really, really fantastic games. Like Chicken Shoot. This allowed them to reach an entirely new and different audience while Sony and Microboy were fighting amongst each other. This has led some people to claim that Nintendo is completely abstinent from the console wars altogether now because their audience is largely separate. Me though, it's more fun to imagine a three-way war. Meanwhile, Microsoft was leaving Sony in the dust in the beginning for a number of reasons. Not only did it have better games in the beginning, but it also had a head start, was far more affordable, and the hardware was relatively easy to put games on. Remember how the N64 was more powerful than the PlayStation but was hard to develop for, so it often fell short? Well, this time the tables turned a little bit because the PS3 CPU was taking advantage of this new innovation called cell architecture, which seemed like this brilliant breakthrough technology, and it technically made it more powerful than the 360 by a substantial margin. The only catch is that nobody really seemed to understand how to optimize games for it properly, so games would often look and sometimes run worse on PS3 than Xbox. It wasn't until a few years in that the PS3 started getting good games in addition to a pretty sweet price drop that it started to gain back some serious ground from Microsoft, and in the end, the race between these two ended up being pretty close. It was a very remarkable comeback story for PlayStation. Meanwhile, the Wii was basically printing money with its great party games like Mario Kart and Smash. As I said, the Wii technically won in terms of sales, but the console that would end up winning my heart would probably be the PS3. And that is purely because of Metal Gear Solid 4. I don't really care what anyone says, I am fully aware that this game is a bit of a mess, but it's the most beautiful mess I have ever seen in my life. Not to mention, around this time, I was a little frustrated with Nintendo forcing these stupid motion gimmicks into their games where I didn't think it was necessary. This is when I realized that I was built different. As for Microsoft, I was still pissed off at them for purchasing Rare and for nuts and bolts, until I realized that if I got a 360, I could play Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie on the XBLA in HD, so that was pretty nice. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that both Microsoft and Sony tried to make their own motion control shit, and they both sucked ass at it, so that was pretty funny.
Well, bam! There it is.
The other big thing was online functionality. This didn't just add new features, but it started to fundamentally change the way games were being made, but also monetized. Now you could download digital copies of games, they had DLC content that you could download, devs could now patch out bugs except for when they don't feel like it, you could type ethnic slurs to your dipshit friends with the PlayStation keyboard. It was a magical time in gaming history. It also introduced the Virtual Console to the Wii, which let you download old classics that were otherwise lost to time. I think a lot of my enjoyment with the Wii came from the Virtual Console, like finally beating Ocarina of Time for the first time, or playing Star Fox 64 again. Then we have the Penis 4 and the Sexbox One and the Wii U, especially the Wii U. This generation was defined by doing everything the previous generation did, except doing it more. This is also when people decided that they knew what teraflops were. By this time, people realized that motion controls were actually kinda stupid and the Wii's momentum started to taper off a little bit, so Nintendo jumped the gun on the next round with their next-gen system, the Wii U, which added even more stupid gimmicks. Now, when I say next gen, what I really mean is slightly more powerful than the other current gen systems, maybe. The Wii U was the successor to the Wii, which had this new wireless gamepad with a touchscreen on it in addition to way better graphic capabilities and online functionality. The Wii U was a very weird thing that nobody seemed to get, both figuratively and literally, and that can be chalked up to very janky, confusing, and seemingly contradictory marketing campaigns. Nintendo went on record to say, "Aw man, we want more hardcore people playing on the Wii U," and then all the TV commercials were directed towards 8-year-olds. And to make this all worse, there was a lot of confusion as to what the Wii U even was. Was it a portable console or an upgrade for the Wii? These were the kinds of questions people were asking. A lot of them were kinda clueless, which is a very bad sign considering the Wii's success was mostly due to how easy it was to understand. It's a bit of a shame too, because the Wii U had a solid library, but people just didn't comprehend this alien technology. It was just a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around. Not to mention the PS4 and Xbox One were on the horizon, which the hardcore audience probably figured out was going to be way more powerful than the Wii U, which meant it was in a too little too late situation. So, casual audiences don't know what this thing is, and hardcore audiences do know what it is, enough to know that it'll be obsolete very soon, so yeah, this thing kinda choked and died pretty quickly. Even though I'd probably say that the Wii U had a better library than the X-Boner, it didn't sell nearly as well because of being conceptually confusing and not marketed as well as it probably should have been, so it was down to Sony and Microsoft again. This pretty much became Sony's domain again, as the PS4 was not only significantly more powerful than the Xbox One, but also, for a lot of people, had more interesting exclusives. It also didn't help that Microsoft said their new console would have this weird online DRM shit and would force you to have your Kinect always hooked up, which not only meant it cost an extra $100 for the package didn't connect, but also raised all kinds of red flags vis-a-vis security. Even though they eventually retracted all that, in shame mind you, they never quite recovered from the backlash and Microsoft officially became the fuck you game company, even though the reality is that 90% of these companies are fuck you companies. They only want you for your money. Nintendo is not your future wife. She's a gold digger, big time. In any case, Xbox mostly stuck to what they know. Halo, Gears, and Forza. They had some other games like Crackdown, which turned out mediocre, and Scalebound, which was cancelled. Cuphead was apparently pretty good. I still haven't played it, but they had their share of multiplats too, which looked and ran like dog shit compared to the PlayStation, so that was pretty neat. Meanwhile, Sony had God of Boy, Uncharted Boy, Horizon Zero Boy, Blood Boy, Ghost of Kojima, Spider-Man, Ratchet and Wanker, Shadow of the Colossus with good graphics, and Last Guardian, and who could forget, Death Stranding. Not all of these games are non-stop, super shooty, jumpy fun, but that was kinda what set the PlayStation apart, at least in the eyes of the mainstream. It seemed like the PlayStation became the home of games that were cinematic pieces of art. They were bigger than games. Now personally, I think the idea that these super cinematic PS4 games are the first of their kind is a tiny bit unfair and a little dismissive to much of the lineage of the medium, but that certainly doesn't make them bad. I beat Uncharted 4 this year, and I thought it was pretty good. In any case, the PS4 as of now has sold more than twice the X-Boner 1, and the Wii U has only sold 13.5 million before being discontinued. From what I understand, the Wii U is the only one that has actually been fully discontinued as of today. Now I think in my case, I probably spent the most time on PS4, and that is mostly because I had it before I got a PC, which meant it was the best place to play multiplats. This is where I played MGS5 for the first time. I got the Platinum Trophy on that shit. It took me 200 hours, but damn, what a great game. It's also where I played a European copy of Doom 16. Now, why do I have a European copy? It's none of your fucking business now, is it? The biggest beef I have with the PS4 is that the online requires a PS Plus subscription, which is like $60 a year, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but considering it was free on the PS3, this was a little frustrating. More than anything, I blame Microsoft because they were charging extra money since the original Xbox days. I give the Wii U second place mostly because of games. I thought Pikmin 3 was fantastic and I'm so happy it was ported to Switch. Color Splash is a game they put on Wii U. Breath of the Wild, it's better on Switch, but entirely playable on the Wii U, so yeah, not so bad for a console that was a complete and utter failure. Speaking of the Switch, following right on the back of the commercial failure of the Wii U, Nintendo decided to jump the gun on the next gen again with the Nintendo Switch in 2017. We finally have the current console war. Now, the Gaystation 5 and Xbox Series Gex wouldn't be released for another 3 years because there was still a lot of mileage left in their current gen systems, but we'll be getting to that in a minute. In a lot of ways, the Nintendo Switch is like Nintendo's redemption arc. Even though this thing is a little more powerful than the Wii U, it's certainly not a generational leap at all and is still significantly less powerful than the Xbox One or the PS4. Basically, this thing can play Wii U games at a slightly higher resolution and hopefully better performance, and it has controllers that are a lot more accessible when they're not drifting like a mafuck, but not only is the Switch a lot more intuitive and easy to understand than the Wii U, but Nintendo actually figured out how to market it better. You see a Switch commercial and you get it. Not to mention the Nintendo Switch has games. I bet you didn't know that. Shortly after launching, they got Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild. They learned from the Wii U era and they actually gave the console 2 defining games within the same year of launching. Mario and Zelda. That's how you do it. You don't even need to say anything. You just sold 1 billion Nintendos like that. The Switch would also get Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and depending on who the last character is, I might call it early for the Switch. By the way, I'm probably gonna live stream my reaction to the reveal on Tuesday, so feel free to check out my Twitch if that's something you're interested in. They also put out the first good Paper Mario game in 13 years. Origami King is not perfect, but at least the lack of horrible bullshit allows me to appreciate the things that it actually got right, and that's what you gotta do. I've accepted that there won't be another 1,000-year door, and yeah, I'm a little broken up about that, but it's fine as long as whatever you're making instead is actually good, and thankfully Insys finally figured that out too. They also got a bunch of ports from the Wii U era, which is pretty great. They brought Pikmin 3, Mario Kart 8, and Mario 3D World. Still no ports of Color Splash or Star Fox Zero, so the 7 people who keep trying to convince me those games are good are going to be pretty broken up about that. But all things considered, the Switch has established a pretty great library, and with Metroid Dread and that 3D Kirby around the corner, I think Nintendo will probably win this one for me. But then, 3 years later, here comes the PS5 and Xbox Series X. At this point, the only really impressive thing about these consoles to me is their power. The exclusives they got right now, I don't really give a shit about, except maybe God of War 2 and Perfect Dark. The other thing is that a lot more of these platforms' exclusives are coming to PC. Halo is on PC, Horizon is on PC, Death Stranding is on PC, even Uncharted 4 is coming to PC. Now to me, I like that. I already have a PC, so if I could play these games without even buying a new machine, that to me is a good thing. But then it wouldn't be a console war if I didn't need to buy a new machine, so let's just suspend disbelief for a minute here. The main reason I'd consider buying these consoles right now is because they're more powerful than my current PC. Depending on how deep in the red I am by the time this computer isn't capable of playing the latest games anymore, buying a PS5 or Xbox would be a more price-effective solution in the short term for gaming than building a new PC. For the kind of money they're charging, these are very powerful machines pushing almost 4K resolution at almost 60 FPS on even the most graphically intensive games. That being said, it is my intention to hold out for a new PC at this time, but maybe I'll be at at a friend's house one day and God of War will just knock me on my ass so hard that I just have to buy a PS5. Otherwise, speaking for myself and only for myself, I don't care way too much about what PlayStation and Xbox are doing these days. What I will say is that the PS5's backwards compatibility is really cool, especially considering the PS4 didn't have any at all. I am a little disappointed they don't have backwards compatibility for anything before then though. I know damn well this thing could run some kind of in-house PS1 through 3 emulators if Sony had the balls to slap them up. There do exist fully functioning emulators for all those consoles made by dirty nerds in their basement, like they got MGS4 up and running now. If some punk bitch emulation kiddos can get MGS4 running on a PC, then I'm pretty sure Sony can figure it out, but they won't because they ain't got no balls. Xbox, on the other hand, has backwards compatibility that goes all the way back to the original Xbox from 2001. That is very impressive. Not all games are supported, but from what I understand, most of the important ones are, so you're probably good. These guys understand the importance of backwards compatibility, but you want to know who doesn't? Nintendo. The Wii could play Gamecube games, and the Wii U could play Wii games. Unfortunately, the Wii U couldn't play Cube games for whatever reason, even though they had an official peripheral that let you use Cube controllers. Then there's the Switch, but this thing doesn't even have disk drives, so you're screwed. At least the Switch has older games for its online service, but of course they'll only exist for as long as they don't shut down the servers, so you don't even really own them anymore. Oh, right. Following in the footsteps of Micro Sony, this is when Nintendo started charging money for online, so that kind of sucks, but at least they put a bunch of beloved classics on it like Bomboozle. I think for me, in spite of all their bullshit, Nintendo's still on top for now, but we'll see how long that lasts, especially considering the new Smash character is probably going to be a Pokemon. The gaming market, like any other, is competitive. Most of us have a finite amount of money and companies will stop at nothing to get it. In the case of video games, a new console usually costs around $500, so unless you either make a decent amount of money or you're a spoilt bitch, if you're getting a game console, you're gonna have to choose, and this, to me, is really where the console wars are justified. Not only do people need to feel satisfied with their purchase and feel smarter than people who bought the other thing, but people who are perhaps wanting to buy one of these consoles can observe the console wars from a distance. But as we established, only a bit of that information is actually useful. You learn that liking a video game console makes you gay. You learn that the PC is the best platform, period, even though it costs $6,000 for a good one. You learn that Joy-Con drift is fake, except when it's not, in which case it's not a big deal because it's only $80, who cares? The honest to God truth is that the only good information you can get, in my experience at least, is from the conscientious objectors. People who actually just don't give a shit about the console wars but have actually played on these consoles themselves. People who are just trying to have fun. I have gained more tangibly useful insight on gaming shit from people I actually know than any of these console war people on the internet. In most cases, they're only really talking about the games rather than the machines they play on because that's what matters, the games. So with all that said, just play the games, man. Play whatever you want and don't let people shame you for it because that's dumb, stupid, and dumb. Good night, guys.